It has been over 30 years since the exodus from the Kashmir Valley of its minority Hindu Kashmiri Pandit community. The exodus took place at the same time that the BJP was upping the ante across northern India, and over the years, the plight of Kashmiri Pandits has become a potent Hindutva issue. In the lead up to the events of 1990, Kashmir was in ferment. Sheikh Abdullah had died in 1982, and the leadership of the National Conference passed on to his son Farooq Abdullah, who won the 1983 election. But within 2 years, the centre broke up the NC and installed dissident Ghulam Muhammad Shah as chief minister. This led to huge disaffection and political instability. The Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front stepped up its activities, and the hanging of the militant leader Maqbool Butt in 1984 added to the sense of foreboding. In 1986, after the Rajiv Gandhi government opened the Babri Masjid locks to enable Hindus to offer prayers there, ripples were felt in Kashmir too. In Anantnag, there was a series of attacks on Hindu temples and shops and properties of Kashmiri Pandits, blamed on separatist and secessionists. In 1986, as opposition to the Shah government grew, Rajiv Gandhi resurrected Farooq Abdullah, who became CM once again. The rigged election of 1987, after which Abdullah formed the government, was a turning point at which militants took the upper hand. By then, the Pandits had begun to be targeted. The valley's BJP leader Tika Lal Taplu was shot dead on September 13. Neelkant Ganju, a retired judge who had sentenced Maqbool Butt to death, was shot dead outside the J&K High Court in Srinagar on November 4. Journalist lawyer Prem Nath Bhatt was shot dead in Anantnag on December 27. Hit lists of Pandits were in circulation. Waves of panic hit the community, especially after a local newspaper published an anonymous message, allegedly from the Hizbul Mujahideen, asking Pandits to leave. Matters came to a head on January 19. By then, the Farooq Abdullah government had been dismissed and governor's rule imposed. There were threatening slogans over loudspeakers from mosques and on the streets. Speeches were made extolling Pakistan and the supremacy of Islam. The Kashmiri Pandit community decided to leave. On January 20th, the first stream began leaving the valley with hastily packed belongings in whatever transport they could find. A second, larger wave left in March and April after more Pandits were killed. On January 21st, the CRPF gunned down 160 Kashmiri Muslim protesters at the Gaukadal Bridge, which has come to be known as the worst massacre in the long history of the conflict in Kashmir. The two events, the flight of the Pandits and the Gaukadal massacre, took place within 48 hours, but for years, neither community could accept the pain of the other. According to some estimates, notably by the Kashmiri Pandit Sangharsh Samiti, of 75,343 Kashmiri Pandit families in January 1990, more than 70,000 fled between 1990 and 1992. The flight continued until 2000. The KPSS has placed the number of Kashmiri Pandits killed by militants from 1990 to 2011 at 399, the majority during 89 to 90. Some 800 families have remained in the valley through these 3 decades. The other contentious question about the exodus is the role played by the administration, and more specifically that of the Jammu and Kashmir Governor Jagmohan. Newly appointed, he had arrived in Srinagar on January 19. The Kashmiri Muslim view of the exodus is that he encouraged the Pandits to leave the valley and thus gave a communal colour to what was until then a non-religious Kashmiri cause. The Kashmiri Hindu view is that this is a disingenuous interpretation. They believe that Kashmiri Muslims, with whom they had lived amicably for centuries, drove them out with a vengeance in a frenzy of Islamism that they could not have imagined even months earlier. The truth, many commentators have concluded, may have been somewhere in the middle. Other commentary has pointed to how the government organized transport for fleeing Pandits so that they could get to Jammu. As the numbers arriving in Jammu increased from thousands to tens of thousands over the first few months of 1990, a mostly middle-class community found itself living in tents, in squalid, filthy camps far removed from the homes they had left behind. Those who had means rebuilt their lives elsewhere in the country. Delhi, Pune, Mumbai and Ahmedabad have Pandit populations. Also Jaipur and Lucknow, or went abroad. The longing to return to the valley did not diminish over the years, though it may have become more an idea than a real ambition. Successive governments have promised that they will help this process, but the situation on the ground in Kashmir has meant this remains only an intention.